You know, life has a funny way of testing you. Just when you think you've hit rock bottom, it throws another curveball. But what if that curveball came from your own flesh and blood? What if, at your husband's funeral, your son, the one you raised, the one you sacrificed everything for, looked at you, not with grief, but with something cold and calculating in his eyes, and whispered, so only you could hear, "You're next, old woman." And what if he didn't know that your husband, even in death, had one last surprise waiting for him? A surprise that would unravel his entire greedy plan, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of his own ambition. Stick around, because this isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about a mother's quiet strength, a husband's enduring love that stretched beyond the grave, and the devastating, inescapable consequences of unchecked greed that can corrupt a family from its very core. It's a tale of how silence can be louder than any shout, and how sometimes justice arrives in the most unexpected and satisfying ways. My name is Sarah. I'm 73 years old, and I live in a quiet, unassuming house nestled amongst tall oak trees in a peaceful suburban town just outside of Albany, New York. For 51 glorious, sometimes challenging, but always loving years, I was married to the most wonderful man, David. He was my rock, my confidant, my best friend. We built our life together from scratch, literally. He was a skilled carpenter, his hands always busy crafting beautiful things from wood, and I was a dedicated, passionate schoolteacher, shaping young minds in the local elementary school. We started with nothing but a shared dream, boundless optimism, and a cramped, two-room apartment above a bustling Italian bakery in the heart of Brooklyn. Every single thing we accumulated throughout our lives, every cherished book on our overflowing shelves, every worn, comfortable piece of furniture in our living room, every penny in our modest bank account, was meticulously earned through decades of tireless hard work, mutual compromise, countless sacrifices, and an endless, unwavering supply of love and devotion to each other. But to our only son, Michael, none of that mattered. To him, David and I were simply two aging, irrelevant figures, stubbornly standing in the way of what he believed was his rightful inheritance. The signs, I guess, were always there, subtly etched into the fabric of our family dynamics, even long before David's health began to fail. Perhaps I was just too blind, too hopeful, or simply too much of a mother to truly see them for what they unmistakably were. Michael was our only child, our precious son. When he was born, I remember holding his tiny, perfect body in my arms, feeling my heart swell with an emotion so profound it felt like it would burst with pure, unadulterated happiness. David and I poured every ounce of our energy, every spare dollar, every waking moment into him. We worked extra shifts, scrimped and saved every cent we could, just to send him to the best schools, to give him every opportunity we ourselves had never been afforded. We proudly bought him his first car when he turned 16, a slightly dented but reliable sedan, and we wholeheartedly helped him set up his very first business venture after he graduated college. We genuinely believed we were doing what good parents are inherently supposed to do, setting their child up for a successful, comfortable, and fulfilling life. But somewhere along that journey, that deep, ingrained gratitude that we hoped to instill in him, slowly but surely, curdled into a chilling sense of entitlement. He began talking about our possessions, our hard-earned assets, as if they were already his, even while David and I were still very much alive and kicking. "Our house will be a great investment property when I finally take over, Mom," he'd casually remark during Sunday dinner, a seemingly innocuous comment that always, without fail, made my stomach clench with an unsettling unease. At first, I'd simply laugh it off, pretending it was just youthful exuberance, a son looking forward to his bright future, perhaps a little too eagerly. But those jokes started to sound less and less like innocent remarks and more like thinly veiled warnings, subtle declarations of intent that sent shivers down my spine. Then he married Jessica. She was a formidable force. Beautiful in a sharp, almost intimidating way, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and eyes that seemed to constantly assess everyone and everything. And she possessed a tongue that could cut glass with its biting remarks. She never bothered to hide her thinly disguised disdain for our simple life, our modest home, and our old-fashioned values. She'd deliberately call me Mrs. Miller instead of Mom, even though I was, technically, her mother-in-law, a deliberate slight designed to create distance and disrespect. and she'd constantly badger David, her voice a sickly, sweet facade of concern. "Mr. Miller, you should really think about retiring fully. Sell off some of these properties. You've worked hard, enjoy your golden years." Every single time she uttered the word sell, I knew, with a sinking certainty in my gut, that she wasn't talking about his small, beloved carpentry workshop or our modest rental unit downtown. She was talking, unequivocally, about our home. The home where Michael had taken his very first steps, where we had celebrated every single Thanksgiving and Christmas, where David and I had lovingly grown old together, creating a lifetime of cherished memories. It felt like she was constantly circling, a predatory vulture, patiently waiting for us to just wither away or simply give up and hand everything over. David, bless his eternally optimistic heart, tried valiantly to brush it off, to ignore the thinly veiled insults and the blatant greed. "Ah, she's just a modern girl, Sarah," he'd say with a forced cheerfulness, attempting to reassure both himself and me. "High-spirited, a little ambitious. She'll settle down eventually." He'd say this with a brave, but ultimately unconvincing, smile, but I could clearly see the worry lines etching deeper and deeper around his kind, tired eyes. I think, deep down, he knew the true, unsettling nature of his son and daughter-in-law. He just couldn't bring himself to fully admit that the boy he had loved so fiercely, the child he had nurtured and guided, could possibly turn so cold, so utterly consumed by avarice. It was a painful, heartbreaking truth, one he tried desperately to shield me from, and one he tried even more desperately to shield himself from until he simply couldn't anymore. His failing health would soon force us all to confront the harsh realities. The day David got sick, it was as if a cold, cruel hand reached out from nowhere and gripped our lives, squeezing every last drop of joy and hope right out of them. It started innocently enough, with a persistent, nagging cough, which gradually worsened, leading to breathlessness and an almost constant fatigue. Then, after a series of terrifying, anxious tests and agonizing waiting periods, came the diagnosis that ripped through our world like a devastating wildfire: stage 4 lung cancer. The words hung in the air of the doctor's office, heavy and suffocating, shattering every single plan, every future dream, every quiet aspiration we had meticulously held onto for our golden years. My vibrant, strong, ever-energetic David reduced to a fragile, vulnerable shell of his former self. It was unbearable to watch. Michael's visits became less and less frequent as David's condition worsened, and when he did bother to show up, it felt less like a loving son visiting his ailing father and more like a CEO making a mandatory, inconvenient appearance. He'd bring his phone charger, prop himself up in a chair in the furthest corner of the hospital room, and scroll endlessly through his social media feeds, barely looking up from his screen while the doctor delivered increasingly grim updates about David's prognosis. Then, after a mere 20 minutes, sometimes even less, he'd abruptly announce, "Got an important client meeting, Mom. Gotta run. Big deal on the line." Jessica, his wife, never came, not once, her repeated, flimsy excuse: "Hospitals make me uncomfortable, Mrs. Miller. All those sterile smells and sick people, uncomfortable." My beloved husband, the man who had loved and provided for her husband for decades, was dying, slowly and painfully, and her primary concern was her own discomfort. The sheer audacity, the callous insensitivity of it all, left me utterly speechless, my overwhelming grief battling fiercely with a simmering, righteous resentment that began to boil deep within me. I spent every single night in that sterile, impersonal hospital room. The rhythmic beeping and whirring of the life support machines became the haunting, incessant soundtrack to my profound agony. I watched David, the love of my entire life, fading a little more with each passing day, his once strong body growing weaker, his once bright eyes growing dimmer. One night, when he was miraculously awake and his mind seemed clearer than usual, but his voice was barely a fragile whisper, he looked at me, a profound sadness etched into his gaze, and said, "Sarah, please, my love, don't let him take everything when I'm gone." My heart momentarily stopped beating. I knew with absolute certainty exactly who him was. "What do you mean, David?" I choked out, tears already pricking the corners of my eyes, blurring his beloved features. He managed a weak, almost ethereal smile, a faint ghost of his old charm. "I hear how Michael talks to you sometimes," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "When he thinks I'm asleep. I've heard Jessica too. Promise me, Sarah, promise me you'll protect what we built together, our legacy." I couldn't speak. The lump in my throat was too large, too painful. I just nodded, helplessly, tears streaming down my face, blurring his beloved features into a watercolor of sorrow. And that night, with an almost defiant strength that seemed to emerge from his rapidly failing body, David asked me to call our longtime family lawyer, Mr. Henderson. David was far too weak to speak much, so he painstakingly wrote everything down on 2 pieces of crisp, legal paper, his hand shaking uncontrollably. But his resolve, his absolute determination, was chillingly clear. When Mr. Henderson finally left, carrying the thick, precious envelope that held David's final wishes, David whispered, his voice barely audible, "It's done, my love. You'll know when to open it." 3 long, agonizing weeks later, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, holding my hand, his final breath a gentle sigh. My world, as I knew it, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The funeral was a confusing, painful blur of black suits, hushed condolences, and the scent of lilies. But beneath the veneer of solemn grief, there was an almost palpable undercurrent of something else, something ugly and disturbing. Jessica, of course, made it into a dramatic performance. Her loud, theatrical wails seemed designed solely to draw attention, to make sure everyone saw her exaggerated pain. Michael, ever the businessman, worked the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, accepting condolences with a stiff, professional air, and even taking a few discreet phone calls in the vestibule. It felt less like a solemn goodbye to the man I loved, and more like a bizarre, morbid networking event, a distasteful prelude to something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but that filled me with dread. And then it happened. The moment that would forever be etched into the darkest corners of my memory, a moment that simultaneously broke and hardened me. I was standing near David's open coffin, my heart heavy with unspeakable sorrow, trying to adjust a wilting lily in the floral arrangement, when I distinctly overheard Michael whispering to his cousin Mark. Mark, a notoriously loose-mouthed opportunist with a reputation for gossiping, chuckled at something Michael had just said. Then I heard Michael's voice, low, venomous, and utterly devoid of emotion. "She'll go soon, too. Then everything will finally be mine, all mine." My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. Mark snickered again, and Michael, his voice now a chilling sneer, added, "Old people just don't know when to stop breathing, do they?" The words hit me like a brutal, physical blow. It was as if my heart, already shattered and aching from David's death, broke into a million more irreparable pieces. Not from grief this time, but from the horrifying, soul-crushing realization that my own son, the boy I had nurtured and loved with every single fiber of my being, the child I had brought into this world, saw me as nothing more than an impediment, an obstacle. A frail, old relic stubbornly standing in the way of his greedy, selfish ambitions. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just stood there, a strange, chilling calm washing over me, settling deep into my bones. I looked at the framed photo of David on the table next to the coffin, surrounded by a wreath of pristine white roses, his kind eyes smiling back at me, and I whispered, so softly no one could hear, "Don't worry, my love. I remember what you said." It was a silent promise, a silent vow, and in that moment, something shifted within me, hardening my resolve. 2 days after the funeral, the phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was almost unnervingly pleasant, sickeningly sweet, too polite. He didn't bother to ask how I was doing, how I was coping with the crushing weight of my loss. He launched straight into it, his tone all business, devoid of any warmth or genuine sympathy. "Mom, I need to get started on the property paperwork right away. It'll be much, much easier if you just give me access to everything. You know, to manage Dad's estate." I played dumb, my voice carefully neutral. "Access to what exactly, Michael?" I asked, my voice calm, almost detached, betraying none of the turmoil raging within me. "Everything, Mom," he said, his thinly veiled impatience now barely disguised. "The house deeds, the bank accounts, the shop documents, all of it. You can trust me. I'll handle all of Dad's affairs. It's what he would have wanted." And that's when I dropped the first subtle, yet potent, hint of the coming storm. "I trust my husband more than I trust anyone else in this world," I said, a subtle tremor in my voice, a tiny crack in my carefully constructed facade of calm. That's when he finally lost it, the thin veneer of his forced civility cracking, then shattering completely. "Mom, stop living in the past. Dad's gone, he's dead, I'm the man of the house now, I'm in charge." His voice boomed through the receiver, rattling the profound silence of my grief-stricken home, echoing the emptiness I felt. I paused, letting his harsh, cruel words hang in the air, allowing them to fully sink in before replying, my voice softer than ever, but laced with an unshakable resolve. No, Michael. You're the man of your house, not mine, not this one. There was a stunned, incredulous silence on the other end of the line, a silence pregnant with his disbelief, before he abruptly hung up without another word. For an entire week after that call, I didn't hear a single peep from him. The silence was deafening, yes, but to my surprise, it was also strangely comforting, a peaceful reprieve from his relentless demands. Then, one crisp, bright autumn morning, just as the leaves outside were beginning to turn vibrant shades of red and gold, Mr. Henderson, our longtime family lawyer, arrived at my doorstep. He held a thick, official-looking brown envelope, the very one David had so painstakingly signed before he died. Inside, everything was laid out with a chilling, heartbreaking clarity. The will had indeed been changed, just as David had promised. Every single asset David and I owned, our beloved house, the small carpentry shop David had poured his heart and soul into for decades, our carefully accumulated life savings, our entire legacy. Everything was to be donated to a local charity trust, specifically dedicated to supporting widows and abandoned elders. And most importantly, until my very last breath, I would have the absolute, undisputed right to live in our home, receive a comfortable monthly pension that would ensure my financial security, and retain all decision-making authority regarding the property. Not one single cent, not one solitary rupee, would go to Michael or Jessica. Not one. My hands trembled violently as I read David's neat, familiar handwriting, tears blurring the words on the official document. The words danced before my eyes, a bittersweet testament to his enduring love and foresight. They were tears of profound sorrow, yes, for my beloved David was truly gone, but also tears of immense gratitude, and a strange, quiet joy that settled deep in my soul. It wasn't anger that filled me now. It was a deep, abiding sense of peace, a vindication of David's love and his unwavering trust in me. Ramesh had protected me, even from beyond the grave, shielded me from the very people who were supposed to be my family. Mr. Henderson, observing my emotional but resolute reaction, asked gently, his voice full of compassion, "Would you like me to inform your son, Mrs. Miller?" I looked up, a ghost of a smile, perhaps a little chilling, touching my lips. "No," I said, my voice firm and steady, surprising even myself with its unwavering conviction. "Let him find out the way he deserves to, in front of witnesses, in front of the very people he tried to impress." The anticipation, I decided, would be part of the exquisite revenge. I imagined his face, the shock, the disbelief, the utter humiliation. It was a cruel thought, perhaps, but after hearing his callous, hateful words at David's funeral, after enduring years of his and Jessica's thinly veiled contempt, I felt no remorse. Only a cold, hard, unyielding sense of justice. 2 weeks later, the phone rang again. It was Michael. His tone was almost unnervingly pleasant, sickeningly sweet, too polite, completely out of character. He wanted to hold a family meeting. Apparently, he'd already been boasting to various relatives, friends, and business associates that he'd proudly inherited the house, the shop, everything. He wanted me to sign a few papers to make it all official, to streamline the process, and get everything sorted. I knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to parade his perceived victory, to make me a reluctant witness to his ultimate triumph over his old woman mother. Little did he know, he was walking directly into a meticulously set trap, a reckoning he wouldn't soon forget. He arrived promptly at my doorstep, with Jessica by his side, both of them dressed impeccably, exuding an air of self-satisfied superiority. Their smiles were plastered on their faces, wide and artificial, not quite reaching their cold, calculating eyes. Jessica even went so far as to offer me a saccharine hug, her overly sweet perfume almost choking me, a sickly scent that seemed to embody her insincerity. "Ma, I'm just so glad you're doing okay," she purred, her words dripping with a fake concern that was entirely unconvincing. I calmly offered them tea, which they accepted with an air of gracious, almost regal condescension. We sat in the living room, the same room where David and I had spent so many countless happy years, raising our son, building our life. Then Michael, ever the efficient businessman, opened a sleek, expensive-looking leather folder. "These are just some transfer documents, Mom," he said, pushing a few official-looking papers across the polished coffee table towards me. You don't have to bother reading much. It's mostly formality, just needs your signature to finalize everything. It's all ours now, anyway. I looked at him, really looked at him, for a long, quiet, incredibly intense moment. This man, this cold, calculating stranger was my son. The boy I had once held in my arms, the child I had lovingly taught to ride a bike, the young man I had cheered for at every single school play. The transformation was complete, utterly devastating. The innocent, loving child was gone, replaced by a calculating, greedy stranger. I picked up the papers, feigning a slow, deliberate interest, my heart a quiet drumbeat of anticipation. "I'll sign them," I said, my voice even, almost bored. "After lunch." He nodded, pretending to be patient, a smirk playing confidently on Jessica's perfectly painted lips. Their victory, they believed, was assured. While they ate, completely oblivious to the impending storm gathering around them, savoring their sandwiches and tea, I discreetly called Mr. Henderson on my cell phone. He arrived within 10 minutes, a slim brown envelope, identical to the one he had brought earlier, clutched in his hand. When he entered the living room, his presence instantly causing a shift in the atmosphere, Michael's brow furrowed in confusion and annoyance. "Why is Mr. Henderson here, Mom?" he asked, a sharp edge of suspicion creeping into his voice, his previous confidence beginning to waver. I smiled, a genuine, if somewhat chilling, smile this time, a smile of quiet triumph. "Because, Michael," I said, my voice clear and resonant, "this house has a story you do know. A story your father wanted to make sure you heard." Mr. Henderson, ever the picture of professionalism, calmly opened his envelope. He pulled out the crisp, official documents, unfolded them with deliberate slowness, and began to read aloud, his voice clear, resonant, and utterly unwavering, filling the tense, sudden silence of the room. "The last will and testament of Mr. David Miller, dated February 14th of this year." As the formal words washed over us, detailing David's final wishes, Michael's confident, smug smile slowly, agonizingly died. Jessica's spoon, halfway to her mouth with a bite of her sandwich, froze in midair, her face draining of all color. She looked like a statue carved from pure disbelief and dawning horror. When Mr. Henderson reached the crucial part, his voice steady and unwavering, enunciating every single word with chilling precision. "All assets and properties, including the family home located at insert fictional address like 123 Oak Lane, Albany, NY. The carpentry workshop at insert fictional address like 45 Elm Street, Albany, NY, and all associated bank accounts and investments are hereby and forthwith to be transferred in their entirety to the Sarah Miller Foundation for Widows and Elders, a newly established charitable trust with full life rights and financial provisions reserved indefinitely for Mrs. Sarah Miller." Michael shot out of his chair as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face a furious, mottled crimson. "What is this? What utter nonsense is this, Mom?" he roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage, disbelief, and burgeoning panic. "This is impossible." Mr. Henderson remained perfectly calm, utterly unperturbed by Michael's outburst. "It's legal, Mr. Miller. Your father meticulously signed it himself with 2 independent witnesses, and it was properly filed with the county clerk's office weeks ago." Michael spun on me, his eyes blazing with a furious, hateful light. "You made him do this. You poisoned him against me. You manipulate him in his last days, you old witch." He shrieked, his face contorted with a sickening blend of fury and betrayal. I looked at him, at the face that was once so familiar, the same face I used to kiss goodnight, the face of the child I had loved more than life itself, and I said softly, but with absolute, unwavering conviction, "No, Michael. You did that yourself. Your own greed, your own words, your own disrespect. Those are the poisons that turned your father's heart against you, not me." Jessica, who had remained frozen in her seat, finally broke, tears now genuinely streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She started muttering incoherently, "We planned everything. We had it all figured out." She stopped abruptly, a look of sheer terror flashing across her face as Michael glared at her, silently, menacingly warning her to shut up, to not reveal anything more. The lawyer, having delivered his devastating news with quiet dignity, calmly gathered his papers, placed them back into the brown envelope, and stood up. "Everything's filed, Mr. Miller," he stated, his voice final, leaving no room for argument. "You have no claim left to any of these assets. Absolutely none." For a long, agonizing moment, Michael just stood there in the middle of our living room, his chest heaving, his meticulously planned world crumbling to dust around him. The silence was thick, heavy with the weight of shattered expectations and thwarted ambition. Then, he whispered, his voice thick with unadulterated venom, "You'll regret this, old woman. You'll live to regret this." And I replied, my voice steady, my heart surprisingly at peace, a quiet strength emanating from me, "I already regret raising a man who forgot how to be a son. I regret the son you became, Michael, not this." He slammed the front door behind him with such force that the old house seemed to shudder, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent rooms. And then he was gone. And that was the last time I ever saw my son. It's been 6 months now since that fateful day. The house is quiet, but it's a profound, peaceful quiet, not the heavy, suffocating silence of grief that once hung in the air. Sometimes, I still walk into David's old study, and I can almost smell the faint scent of sawdust and his favorite worn leather-bound books. There's a small picture frame on his desk, a faded photograph of us in our 20s, smiling radiantly, full of youthful dreams and boundless hope, with the entire world seemingly at our feet. It's a bittersweet reminder of a love that endured, a love that, even after death, continued to protect me, to guide me, and to provide me with the strength to carry on. The Sarah Miller Foundation for Widows and Elders officially opened its doors 2 months ago. With David's careful, loving planning and our shared life savings, we've managed to build a small, welcoming, and incredibly comforting home for women who have found themselves alone and vulnerable. Widows like myself, resilient single mothers struggling to make ends meet, and abandoned elderly women whose own children have forgotten or forsaken them, just as Michael had forsaken me. Every single time a new resident arrives, their eyes wide with fear and uncertainty, I see a reflection of my own past self. Scared, alone, but still clinging fiercely to dignity, still searching for a glimmer of hope amidst the wreckage of their lives. Just last week, an 80-year-old woman named Evelyn, a new resident with eyes that held a lifetime of untold stories, her hands gnarled by years of hard labor, confided in me, "You're lucky, Sarah. You had a husband who protected you even after death, a man who truly loved you." I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile this time, a smile that reached my eyes and softened their weary lines. "Yes," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I also had to learn to protect myself while I was still alive, Evelyn. Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the most vital." Do I miss Michael? Yes. Every single day, a pang of sorrow pierces my heart. I miss the little boy who used to hold my hand so tightly when we crossed the bustling street, his small fingers wrapped around mine. I miss the sweet, goofy teenager who'd come to me with his problems, seeking comfort and advice, believing I had all the answers. But that boy, that sweet, loving child, grew into a man who chose greed over family, who saw his parents as mere obstacles to his ambition, as inconvenient stepping stones to his own selfish desires, instead of as cherished blessings. And that, I've come to realize with a heavy heart, is something no mother should ever have to forgive, nor should she be expected to. I didn't destroy his future. He destroyed it himself, piece by agonizing piece, with his relentless greed, his insatiable arrogance, and his cruel, thoughtless words. "You're next, old woman." Those were the last words he ever said to me, and I guess he was right. I was next. Next to live. Next to build something truly meaningful, something that would honor David's memory and provide solace to others. Next to turn my profound pain, my anger, my heartbreak into a powerful, enduring purpose. Next to finally find a deep, unshakable, and lasting peace. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked something in your heart, then I urge you, watch the next one.